evidence of other crimes and bad acts. According to this Rule 4 of the Federal Rules of Evidence, evidence of other crimes and bad acts in some cases is admissible. According to this rule, as we can see, we have this. We have these prohibited uses. In these prohibited uses, we mean this other crime evidence could not be used as character evidence. Meaning is you cannot, the prosecution cannot first try to prove the defendant's character and then ask the jury to reason on a particular occasion the defendant acted in accordance with the character. For example, we already discussed this issue. For example, if the defendant is on trial for criminal assault, the prosecution cannot introduce character evidence, cannot say the defendant was a violent person, the defendant has a reputation of being a violent person, or the defendant has committed other violent acts before. On this occasion, the defendant acted in accordance with his violent character and committed this criminal assault. That is to use this other crime evidence as character evidence. It is not permitted. So that is what we mean by these prohibited uses. But in the same rule, we also have these permitted uses. Other crime evidence could be introduced for another purpose. For instance, this other crime evidence may be introduced to prove motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, absence of a mistake, or lack of an accident. So we know if the question is asked whether this other crime evidence is admissible or not, the answer is depends. If it is used as a character evidence, it is not permitted. But if it is used for a permissible purpose, for example, if it is introduced to prove motive, opportunity, identity, absence of mistake, or lack of accident, that would be permitted. There is one point we need to make clear. We are discussing here is evidence of other crimes and bad acts. It is important for us to know for this evidence of other crimes and bad acts to be introduced, we do not require there is a conviction. Because as we can see, the title of this discussion is evidence of other crimes and bad acts. If the prosecution wants to show the defendant committed other crimes, it is okay, but we do not need any conviction. It does not need to rise the level of conviction so long as there is evidence indicating the defendant committed other crimes or bad acts. This evidence could be introduced. But once again, to answer the question whether the evidence of whether this other crime evidence would be admissible or not, we need to determine whether that is going to be used as character evidence or we are going to use it to prove a permissible purpose. If it is used as character evidence, it's not permitted. But if it is used for one of these permissible purposes, the evidence could be admitted. We can look at this case, the Bryce in the Bath case. It was an Old English case, and in this case, the defendant was on trial for murder. He murdered his wife, Miss Mandy, by getting her drowned in a bathtub in order to get inheritance money from her. So before his wife was drowned in the bathtub on 2 occasions, the defendant complained to a doctor that Miss Mundy had a fit, and so the defendant claimed that his wife was drowned by accident. But the prosecution had a different theory. The prosecution just said the defendant committed this murder because he wanted to kill his wife so that he could obtain the inheritance money after the wife's death. So this was not an accident. This was a murder. So the prosecution later on found out the defendant had other two wives. In addition to this Miss Mundy. And these other 2 wives, they also got drowned in the bathtub. And in both cases, the defendant also obtained inheritance money from these two wives. So the prosecution wanted to introduce this evidence, the evidence of the death of the defendant's other 2 wives. So the evidence law question is whether this evidence of the death of the defendant's other 2 wives admissible or not. The defendant argued the evidence was not admissible. He argued the prosecution could not introduce other crime evidence to attack his character. So the defendant said this the death of his other 2 wives, that was a character evidence that should not be permitted. And then the ruling of the court was the evidence was admissible to show whether Miss Mundy's death was an accident or by design by the defendant. So this evidence actually was admitted to prove lack of an accident, would be admissible for the purpose to prove lack of an accident. So we know in this case, and we need to understand it, why this other crime evidence, admission of other crime evidence in some cases is important. Because if we re-examine this case, before this defendant's, before this Miss Mundy got drowned in the bathtub, the defendant on 2 occasions indeed complained to a doctor that his wife actually had a fit. So the defendant claimed that was an accident. So we understand if we would say these are the evidence of the defendants of the death of the defendant's 2 other wives would not be admissible, it would be very easy for the jury to come to the conclusion, indeed, Miss Mundy actually was drowned by accident. But we know that was not true because the defendant in this case, in his way of operation, he actually just got into this marriage, and the purpose of his getting into this marriage was to have these women killed. So after that, he could obtain the inheritance money from them. So this evidence that he also used the similar method to kill his other 2 wives, this evidence was extremely important to show whether the death of Miss Mundy was by accident or that was by design of the defendant. So that's why under certain circumstances, if this other crime evidence is to be used for a permissible purpose, we know the introduction of this evidence actually is very important. Otherwise, we could have this issue that really guilty defendant could not be convicted of the crime they actually committed. Of course, we already discussed this other crime evidence could also be admissible for the purpose of proving motive, identity, opportunity, knowledge, lack of accident, etc. But in this particular case, the court admitted the evidence to prove lack of accident. The ruling of the case, the ruling of the court in this case was this evidence was admissible. It was not as a character evidence. The judge actually instructed the jury they should not really come to the conclusion based on the evidence of this, the death of the defendant's two other wives, that the defendant was a bad person. The court said the only reason for us to admit this evidence is to allow the jury to make a determination whether the victim, Miss Mandy, her death was an accident or by design by the defendant.